of the rim. Got it! Oh, the slam! Oh, using Curry way downtown. Oh, what a shot from Curry!
Yep, once again, as you can probably tell by the runtime of this video, I got a little carried away. Like the Celtics video though, it's only because I feel I personally experienced a vast majority of the story, having started watching the NBA in 2003. Originally, years ago when I thought of this, the line you could draw from David Robinson to Kawhi's departure really fascinated me, and now they've got Victor Wembanyama, it adds a whole new dynamic. There's so many points in this story you'll see where none of this was really supposed to happen. So over around the next hour, we will go into detail of how the San Antonio Spurs became not only one of the luckiest franchises of all time, but also one of the greatest and savviest. Videos like this are possible thanks to today's sponsor, SeatGeek. With over 28 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app, making it super easy to get to any event really. They've got more than 70,000 of them, including concerts, sports, festivals, and more. Using SeatGeek, I've attended many NBA games, music festivals, and as every season, I will keep attending NBA games. Currently, with the NFL playoffs and the NBA and NHL seasons in full swing, you don't want to miss out. SeatGeek has your tickets to every game, plus artists like Drake, Travis Scott, and Bad Bunny are on tour. They put all the tickets across the web in one place to make sure you're getting a good deal. Aiding with that, each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so look for the green dots. Green means good, red means bad. Also, every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee, with SeatGeek being the only site that allows you to return your tickets ahead of the event with swaps. As usual, use my code DOM2K for $20 off tickets at SeatGeek. That's $20 off your first purchase with promo code DOM2K. Be sure to click the link in the description to download the app. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that it was David Robinson's foot injury which allowed the Spurs to luck into Tim Duncan through the draft. A complete anomaly, by the way, as up to the 97 season, the Admiral had hardly missed any games at all, helping lead San Antonio to multiple 50-win campaigns in 7 years. The other two marks were 47 and 49 wins. Given the random injury, they'd missed the playoffs at only 20 wins for the first time since Robinson hopped on board, granting them a chance at adding the first overall pick to what had been a really good squad throughout the 90s. You've got to venture even further back to fully understand the luck, however, rewinding exactly a decade to when they drafted Robinson, donning a 14% chance at the first overall pick. 1997 gave them 21% odds, to which news columnist Buck Harvey quipped that San Antonio's chances of winning a second lottery were the same as Vernon Maxwell's odds of hitting an open jumper when he played point guard for the Spurs. Insane stray. Regardless, there wouldn't be too many jokes left to make about players here, as Tim Duncan would slot in perfectly to bring the Twin Tower scheme to life many years after their counterparts in Houston tried it. This still required plenty of good fortune. Who was to say the duplicated production down low would produce wins? Who was to say he and Robinson would mesh on or off the court? Was it even guaranteed the 7'1" big would come back the same after a broken foot? Helping address at least two of the issues, Greg Popovich had been promoted to head coach during the off year, possibly qualifying as the most important decision of the next 2 decades. Avery Johnson would later discuss how, through Duncan's maturation, he began dominating Robinson during practices, signaling that the torch was quietly being passed in those empty gyms far before anyone else knew. It reportedly got so bad, in fact, Pop wound up making them play for the same teams during scrimmages, so as to not let the situation get out of hand. Still, it created no issues between the two, which is absolutely not the case in every scenario between alphas. Timmy was the perfect successor, willing to learn from the vet, simultaneously accepting Pop's tough coaching style for years to come. As you've probably heard through various former Spurs players, everyone was not able to survive or roll with his ways. And so, the rookie season served as the perfect setup for the future, where Duncan and Robinson posted disgustingly similar numbers, nearly identical. Tim also qualified as an all-star right from the get-go. Outright winning the championship then and there, though, was a bridge too far once they ran up against the defending conference champion Utah Jazz, yet major success wasn't too far away. San Antonio had clearly discovered another gem. 1999 may well be the strangest outing in NBA history. a season forced into stoppage until early February, leaving only 50 games available to be played. Despite this, the squad was healthier through the year and had made a key signing in Mario Ellie during the offseason. With Duncan now clearly taking the lead role for the world to see, they would dash through the West, losing only one game on the way to the NBA Finals, where they'd catch a favorable matchup against an Ewingless Knicks team. Also of note, on the way to said series, they swept the Los Angeles Lakers just one season before Kobe would officially break out and he and Shaq would put it all together as a whole. Thus, in just his second season, Duncan had posted one of the most dominant finals ever, quickly solidifying himself as a top player overall and proving in no time he was here to stay as the torchbearer from Robinson. Better yet, Chicago's dynasty had literally just been put to rest, so the league was also open to a new team to carry the torch. The Twin Tower duo having completed the mission so soon, there was no reason they couldn't keep it going for at least a bit. Well, this is what the world knew at the time anyways. What they weren't hip to was A, San Antonio would absolutely be considered a dynasty in due time after waiting their turn, and B, they just lucked into a massive part of said dynasty through, once again, the draft. Pick 57. Who the hell finds a big three-piece on the tail end of any draft? Yet alone right after winning a championship. The Spurs, that's who. Specifically R.C. Buford, who'd been only the director of scouting in '99. He attended the FIBA World Championship in Australia, which is about all it took. Manu still needed maturation, however, so a few more years overseas improving and winning were in order. For now, their luck had run a bit dry, as although a 53-win season in 2000 seems to suggest a repeat could be well within range, Duncan suffered a lateral meniscus tear during game number 78. What a gut punch. Oh, the injury did not put him out officially if you're wondering. Pop did. Back to that monumental decision to name him head coach, he was tasked with a head coach decision. Allow your superstar who wants to play in the playoffs to go out on a risky knee but potentially repeat, or personally hold him out, nixing any realistic chance to protect your title. On the choice, quote, "He was young, a franchise player," Popovich said. He wasn't just a #1 pick. With him, you've got an opportunity to win multiple championships if you don't screw it up. I didn't know if the injury could get worse or get chronic. Wow. How about the foresight of a third-year coach with the best interests of his star player and franchise in mind? Of course, it all led to them standing no chance against Phoenix in round 1, which we now know was well worth it. Read a tiny bit deeper here though. A lost subplot of that predicament comes in the potential role it played in allowing Los Angeles to fully get off the ground. In 2000, it's seldom remembered Sacramento pushed Shaq and Kobe to an elimination game despite being an A seed, despite just how dominant O'Neal had been all season long as MVP. The fringe relationship between the two co-stars is very well documented. Who's to say they put it all together and dethroned the champs in round 2 if the matchup materialized? They had split the season series with San Antonio, giving LA 2 of their whopping 15 losses on the year. Hypotheticals aside, the 2000 Lakers survived 2 elimination scenarios on the way to their first ever parade, giving credence to Jerry West, who once upon a time promising Shaq he'd brought him a kid he'd win multiple championships with. Win multiple championships they did. Whoa, we need to make one more turn here though. One more subplot. Not only had the Spurs' absence potentially helped greenlight a dynasty outside of their own, Tim Duncan was now a member of the Orlando Magic. Or so he would have been if we weren't discussing an extremely lucky and savvy franchise. The stories of Duncan's last-second decision to spurn Orlando are all over the place in the year 2024. Grant Hill has reiterated it was Doc Rivers telling Duncan's girlfriend she couldn't ride on a team plane during road trips. Doc himself claims the story isn't told correctly, stating he told her families could accompany the team from time to time, which is a semi-important distinction. Also worthy of note, families traveling on team planes wasn't the norm yet. All we're missing is Tim's accounts of events, as another tidbit presents how he told Doc he was sure he was coming, adding that he only wanted to go see Pop face to face and give him the news personally out of respect. This is where Rivers says John Calipari told him he fucked up letting Duncan take said trip. He might be right. Remember we spoke of Duncan and Robinson's solid relationship on and off the court? Admiral allegedly cut his vacation short to be a part of the goodbye meeting, helping Pop plead the case for more titles if he stayed, convincing him his back had more years left. Because you might be asking yourself why Timmy ever considered leaving in the first place so close to having just won a title? Well yeah, Robinson and the team were getting older, while a big 3 featuring Grant Hill and T-Mac awaited in Disneyland. He shared an agent with Hill, by the way. Since restricted free agency hadn't been invented, he was well within his right to be leaving so soon too. The entire story could have ended right there. Hill went on to recount his wife telling him in the hotel later she'd seen the body language of Duncan's girlfriend during the convo with Doc. He wasn't coming to Orlando. Well, the story at the Alamo lives to see another day. For 2001 and 2002, the now proven Lakers became the only team a near 60-win Spurs were unable to defeat, obviously including 02 when Tim VP became a thing. All of a sudden, the NBA fandom looked up and a torch had indeed been passed by Chicago, just not where it immediately appeared to have been going back in '99. Before we move on from 2002 though, let's have another small chat about the good graces falling upon one organization. During 01, their starting point guard had been Antonio Daniels, who was essentially a shooting guard posing as PG. The other options were an ancient Terry Porter and Avery Johnson. As mentioned earlier, age could have been a reason Duncan never had wandering eyes. As good a team as they'd remained, anyone could see the need for a long-term solution. Enter Tony Parker, who was absolutely never supposed to don a Spurs uni, or a Hornets one, but that's a topic for later. The thing about European point guards in the early 2000s is, well, they weren't really a thing yet. There's examples here and there, only teams weren't all in on the foreign movement just yet. It wasn't a proven formula. Along those lines, Parker's first workout in front of Pop went so poorly, he told the organization not to bring him back. He didn't need to see anymore. After some convincing, a second try commenced, and although it completely changed his opinion, there weren't solid expectations Tony would still be available at pick 28 in 2001. Tony was not available at pick 28 in 2001 for a few seconds. He wrote in his book he'd been given a Celtics hat at the draft and told his pick was imminent. Boston it was. 3 minutes before the announcement, however, he was told to go back up due to the fact the Celtics owner scared at the very final moment, saying, quote, "No European point guards. It's too risky." In his place, Joe Forte was selected. It was the year Boston would go on to reach the conference finals off the backs of Pierce and Antoine Walker damn near alone, by the way. Despite the Celtics head coach and GM both badly wanting Parker, all of NBA history changed on a dime as San Antonio was elated to watch him slide right into their dangerously brittle point guard position. It didn't guarantee anything immediately, however. Tim Duncan was skeptical of the direction right off the bat, reportedly not even speaking to Parker until the playoffs and offseason of 2002. Pop, however, knew what he saw, giving him the starting one position much sooner than later. Okay, so back to Los Angeles, quickly rattling off 3 straight titles whilst dominating the lockout champs multiple times in the process. With Shaq and Kobe, a four-peat simply couldn't be ruled out, especially due to the piss-poor competition routinely emerging from the East. Fortunately for the NBA, San Antonio had absolutely cooked behind the scenes. Parker immediately developed into a formidable PG in year 2, sharpshooter Steve Smith and staunch defender Bruce Bowen tagged along the year before, alongside Steven Jackson, who was now a contributing piece, while Manu Ginobili finished baking, ready to serve in the league. Although Duncan to this day is widely credited with carrying in the finals by multiple teammates from 2003, the Los Angeles series became the first time you'd ever see Tim, Tony, and Manu lead a series in scoring together, a trend that lasts for an eternity starting here. With David Robinson continuing to play, you could literally see a transition era taking place while they were winning and contending, straight from the Twin Tower era to the Big Three era. What franchise has ever practically christened their future core while still winning with the old? It's likely what Boston's plan was with Len Bias in the 80s. In any case, while San Antonio was on its way back up, LA had been out of gas for some time now, with this being the year Shaq chose to, quote, heal on company time for a toe injury. Only one of the many problems facing the organization's four-peat hopes. Specifically in the playoffs, a gassed Robert Horry missed 36 of 38 three-pointers. Even just a few more makes would have gone a long way, including the one to potentially give Los Angeles a 3-2 series lead. The champs had fallen in 6, while repeat MVP Tim Duncan went on to post yet another all-time final stat line to help the Admiral to his second ring before retirement, assuring there'd been no mistakes just because '99 was a lockout season. Perhaps the unit would even get their 3rd ring a year later, matching the Lakers. They were definitely getting that 3rd ring and repeating, because Jason Kidd was now a San Antonio Spur. Or he would have been, if they were an even luckier franchise. Yeah, Kidd, who was probably the best point guard in the league, had to be fed up coming out of the East just to play one of these two juggernauts. So he nearly joined the juggernaut. A move which was too insane for him to stomach, even considering how badly he wanted a title. Kidd verbally committed to the squad only to get cold feet on the way home and back out of it. Come on now, who would ever join an elite team they just fell victim to? But especially if you've got to stand next to them on your ring night, probably would have been even weaker than the Durant event. This rivalry is fun, ain't it? All the more when you consider Jason Kidd didn't ruin it by making the Spurs invincible. Just a couple of the best players of all time, best teams of all time, hell, the legit owners of the 2000s. They went at it quite a bit early on. Unfortunately, because of creative differences, 2004 served as the last time we'd get the blessing, and it did not disappoint. Despite Horry's recent struggles, R.C. Buford knew the 5-time champ could play a role and signed him to a 2-year deal with the ball club. Another successful season ensued while Ginobili specifically saw a second-year jump, and it'd absolutely be needed with the Lakers having pushed all their chips forward to make the pairing work. Malone and Payton had joined the fray in a desperate attempt to collect a ring. Luckily enough, this conglomerate was too dysfunctional and injured for much of the season to be considered unbeatable, setting the stage for a 5th playoff duel in 6 years. San Antonio grabbed a 2-0 lead out of the gate. The Lakers battled back, forcing another deciding Game 5. This time when Duncan put through what appeared to be the dagger, Derek Fisher responded with possibly the most improbable game winner ever. I mean, maybe a different Derek topped him many eons later. Heartbreak. What would have likely turned into a chance at a repeat instead gave the Lakers a chance at their 4th championship, which would have put distance between the two budding dynasties. Instead, they famously flamed out against Detroit, then broke up, sending Shaq east and splitting the most dynamic duo to ever grace the court. Now, for the time being, there wasn't a single doubt. The most dominant team would be the men who literally only lost to the Lakers over the past 4 seasons when healthy. Their big three was rock solid and unselfish. 2 championship rings already decorated their knuckles. The steady hand of Popovich guided the ship, with his star players willing to take whatever coaching he dished out. A tone set by their stoic leader. Ginobili and Parker cared little enough for their personal accolades to make whatever sacrifices necessary to win, specifically Manu, who came off the bench as needed, still showing in 2005 he could be an all-star when starting. The West was challenging, no doubt, yet there wasn't a single team who could definitively claim the upper hand in a 7-game series. The Lakers left with scraps in the ashes of the O'Neal trade. What would come next? Even though the dynasty had fractured, playing ball out west still proved to be an extreme sport, as nearly every team who earned a playoff spot won 50 games. It was so steep, in fact, 59 wins by San Antonio only qualified for second, with the fast-paced Suns having gone 62-20 through the addition of Steve Nash. Though Dallas had been the team to lose him, even they amassed nearly 60 victories, while the Rockets were fresh off of landing T-Mac to pair with Yao Ming. In short, there were no Shaq and Kobe's. There were also no guarantees. This helps make it all the more impressive that Duncan and company relatively breezed through the West, ultimately gentlemen sweeping the Suns in round 3. I can't bring it up without mentioning Joe Johnson's orbital fracture, however. He would see no playing time until Game 3 once Phoenix had already suffered an 0-2 deficit, no doubt contributing to the unexpectedly easy departure. Not for nothing, but this was the second straight Spurs run aided by injury, as in the 0-3 conference finals, Dirk suffered a strained knee, holding him out of the rest of what was supposed to be a heated series. And while he'd been playing, it was. It's simply not discussed because of how many titles San Antonio proceeded to win, then considering everyone they'd beat in the future. Case in point, the defending champion Detroit Pistons. Likely on a list for most criminally underrated final series of all time, Detroit came within a hair of repeating, playing as the only team to ever win a Game 6 on the road while being down 3-2 in a 2-3-2 finals format. The difference maker? As R.C. Buford had once said, Robert Horry could serve this team when the times were right. His Game 5 dagger saved the squad from having to win 2 straight against a defensive juggernaut, very much changing history by giving them just enough space to eke out a 3rd NBA title in 7 seasons. The 2005 finals brought about no talks of a carry job. This time, the Big Three specifically had more of an even output, while Horry's hot shooting from deep anointed Buford as an absolute genius. Housing a core still in its 20s, the end wasn't necessarily near either. Plus, they'd beaten the best of the best multiple times now. Who could stop them? 2006 would serve as Tony Parker's strongest year to date, where he'd lead the crew in scoring for the first time ever. Although unselfishness had been a staple of their unit, he admitted in his book at some point being an all-star was a huge deal, and felt he'd already been deserving. This yearning was understandable when you realize he was the only guy out of the core three who'd not yet achieved the honor, while coming very close to having been replaced by Jason Kidd just a few years prior. This season would bring the blessing, with him having specifically used summertime to hone in on his shooting, which had become a known weakness. To add insult, the NBA champs also won some free agency sweepstakes for Michael Finley fresh off of a productive year with the ultra-competitive Mavericks. If it doesn't sound too crazy to you, take note that Dallas had been doing everything it could to trade Finley east just to keep him away from the Spurs whilst trying to avoid the luxury tax. Mike, however, was hungry for a title, so after being waived when no trade was found, he spurned teams such as Miami and Phoenix because, wait for it, a visit from Greg Popovich. The soul box from Game of Zones likely explains everything. So, the defending champs who just toppled the defending champs essentially gained an all-star point guard and another shooter, which was the factor damn near responsible for just having pushed them over the top in Detroit. Incredible. Yet, somehow, not enough. Another dominant season granted 60 wins, with the Suns and Mavs hot on their tails having gone nowhere. Well, Phoenix had, allegedly. Amari Stoudemire missed all but 3 games in 06 due to an off-season knee surgery, but the unit pushed on somehow to win 54 games and appear in the conference finals regardless. Honestly, it might have been another free trip to the finals had San Antonio met him there. It's just Dirk Nowitzki had other plans. Having lost to them twice since he was drafted, one including a potential finals trip lost to injury, and watching them win titles as Duncan took title of best power forward, Nowitzki felt like the little brother to his Texas counterparts. Not to mention, they just recently grifted an important player off his roster. Alongside posting a dominant series, he joined and won to tie a Game 7 they were on the brink of losing. You'll notice on this play, Ginobili slides over and commits a deeply boneheaded foul. Dallas squeezes by in OT, and the defending champs have fallen in their strongest, most talented year thus far. The foul by Ginobili reportedly sent him into a spiral, taking square blame and blowing it specifically for Michael Finley and Fabrizio Alberto, who both partly signed with San Antonio because of their connection to him. Multiple players and staff allege they routinely checked up on Manu throughout the summer. Okay, but you can damn near trace the 06 Spurs not finishing the job down to this exact moment. As proven before, there wasn't necessarily any teams out there they flat out couldn't be in a series. Knowing this, a nearly identical roster set out to reclaim the title in 07 with very much the same story. Mavericks, Spurs, Suns, everyone else. The Western Conference, ladies and gents. As anyone knew at the time, it turned out the We Believe Warriors drew a spoiler card, using only 6 games to oust the 67-win Dirk MVP-led Mavs in their first round. Almost immediately, the path to an NBA championship, not just a finals berth, became much easier for either Phoenix or San Antonio. Ben Wallace was no longer a Piston, the defending champion Heat had been injured to hell, whilst the Cavaliers were absolutely not championship ready regardless of what LeBron was doing. This led to Spurs brass believing if they could just win Game 5 against the Suns, they could go ahead and start printing the banner. Another tidbit Parker divulged in his book. That's insanely disrespectful, and rightfully so when you consider we're talking about a second round series. They didn't think highly enough of any of the remaining teams to feel threatened, which was not an incorrect sentiment. Still, if you're following the theme of Spurs luck, even outside of their drafting and such, you can now add Robert Horry hip-checking Steve Nash at the end of Game 4. So maybe not just dumb luck, he straight up created it. However, the altercation prompted Boris Diaw and Amari Stoudemire to leave their respective benches, resulting in an automatic 1-game suspension at the most pivotal point of any series. Stoudemire claims no one knew the rule about stepping on the court at the time. Despite this handicap, Phoenix lost Game 5 by only 3 points, forever haunting their fan base over what could have been if it only revolved around basketball. Regardless, apparently one side knew the rules. San Antonio proceeded to lose just 1 game moving forward, cleaning up in their first ever meeting with LeBron James. More importantly, the wealth had finally been shared, Tony Parker becoming the first Spurs player to nab Finals MVP outside of Timmy. On his way out, Duncan correctly predicted the future in telling LeBron it'd be his league soon. A horroring prophecy for San Antonio's story. 4 NBA titles in 8 seasons. Dynasty. Sure, there'd been no repeats, yet grabbing half the rings available in any time period is nothing short of dominance that can be argued with, especially while continuing to survive the West. Although the Lakers had come out of the gate strong, the Spurs had passed them up. It was time for Kobe to respond. The most fascinating part of this story to me is just how long they remained together and sacrificed for each other despite eventually hitting a drought of no results, and even receiving vastly disappointing ones consecutively. You simply don't see star players foregoing money, numbers, and accolades in the interest of competing if the winning even appears to slow down. Yet here, it's a key principle of how they wound up winning championships in 3 separate decades. Repeating in 2008 became unlikely from the jump, as the era of freebies after emerging from the West was over, given the introduction of the Celtics' Big Three. Even worse, All-Star big man Pau Gasol took his spot next to Kobe midway through the season right in San Antonio's backyard. Mind you, throughout their rivalry, LA exerted dominance, losing only once in 2003 and also back in '99 before Kobe officially reached superstardom. Ever since, if Mamba had a co-star, he usually found himself on top, and despite the rewriting of history, he absolutely carried his own weight when the duels took place. He wasn't just some tag-along to Shaq. Gasol was no Shaq, he was also no slouch either, and complemented Bryant's skill set perfectly under Phil Jackson. Speaking of Shaq, in a last-ditch effort by Phoenix to clear the hurdle, former Spurs Steve Kerr acquired him to pair next to Stoudemire down low and hopefully just out-talent everyone, I guess. Meanwhile, attempting resurrection from the most disappointing playoff exit ever, Dallas made a move of its own, acquiring Jason Kidd, who was no doubt by now regretting his choice to evade San Antonio. Thus, this time around, every Western Conference playoff team did win 50 games, while hosting both league MVP Kobe Bryant and MVP runner-up Chris Paul. It was a madhouse. Even with all the noise, round 3 wound up as predicted, adding another chapter to the Spurs-Lakers rivalry. Only matters had reverted to the early 2000s, as a terribly hungry Kobe Bryant averaged nearly 30 points a game to set things straight in a close but decisive 5 games. Here, it's very relevant to mention we are 4 championships into this thing. The Spurs were simply aging, and were going to need to assemble the correct combination of pieces eventually to continue. Outside of the Big Three, Brent Barry, Bruce Bowen, Michael Finley, and Kurt Thomas were approaching ancient years, simply unable to bridge gaps when, say, 6th Man of the Year Ginobili's ankle reduced him to role player production. Not only was the West unrelenting in its competition, who knew how long Kobe and Gasol could keep it going? The excitement and play around them was fresh. As you can see with a peek at the '09 roster, management went through quite a bit trying to find a spark. Meanwhile, Ginobili's ankle worsened into a fracture, dashing him off the roster in April. Duncan's knees were aching as well, leaving Tony Parker to recapture his top scoring role. With a pretty clear understanding, they simply couldn't work like this long term. Los Angeles had progressed to 67 wins in their search for redemption, meaning even if a rematch ensued, there'd be zero shot at a successful outcome. The Mavericks smelled blood and took advantage, sending them packing in round 1 while tying the playoff series score. 2010 brought along another year of age and roster experimentation, including what was sadly regarded as one of their biggest free agent acquisitions ever in Richard Jefferson, who still averaged 20 a game in 2009. This punch, in theory, could provide a future they desperately needed going forward, although it wound up falling extremely flat. Other than Richard, it was more Big Three, more random journeymen, although they were at least younger, and more injury when Tony Parker hurt his hand, causing him to miss 26 games. Of course, the setback caused their lowest win total and win percentage since David Robinson's injury set the course for the franchise. Despite settling a score with their old foes in Dallas through 6, Phoenix packed brooms in round 2. The 2010 Suns are absolutely not an iteration of Nash and Stoudemire squads you hear much about, yet they made it as far as to push Kobe and Gasol to the brink in round 3. So the story isn't so much how this of all their meetings was the time Phoenix flat out dominated them, it was simply San Antonio's downfall. 2013 and 14 basically block out just how average they were after the '07 title. The RJ signing failed to produce tangible results, the roster hadn't been able to rebuild adequately through drafting due to seeding highly every year, which left them with only a hope that whatever random assortment of players they were pushing could finally be the correct mix. Making matters worse, at their absolute lowest point, the league as a whole would take another jump in 2010 free agency, as multiple stars were granted an opportunity to take full control of their futures. With Kobe having recently stacked numbers 4 and 5 through a repeat, potentially reclaiming dynasty talks, Miami formed their Big Three to get in on the action. Again, zero freebies left for anybody who scaled the West. Dallas hadn't gone away, constantly tinkering with the roster to finally get Dirk over the finish line. LA hadn't gone away, poised to possibly three-peat. The damn Thunder were a 50-win team already, right on the doorstep of getting KD, Westbrook, and Harden to contention. An extremely young core thought to be in the mix for years to come. A franchise you've heard so much about essentially dwindled to an afterthought, moving into season 4 without a fresh title. Ginobili and Duncan approaching their mid-30s, 2011 was probably their last shot before real talks of ending it all approached. The 2011 San Antonio Spurs won 61 games, their best mark since the 63 wins in 06 right before winning another title a year later. Huh? How did a team which appeared to be sucking in its final breaths randomly return to mark the second best record in the entire association? Well, the big three were healthy again. Younger draftees such as George Hill, DeJuan Blair, and Gary Neal contributed properly, and they were still the Spurs, so that's all they really required to win games. The big three were healthy again. No, they weren't. It's the piece you don't really ever hear about when their loss to the 8th-seeded Grizzlies comes up, which is rare anyways because they erased it shortly after. The Spurs were healthy for 99.9% of the season, in which Timmy was already looking washed finally, by the way. Still good, but good in like an old way. It helped nothing when he sprained his knee in late March, on top of Ginobili hurting his elbow in the final game of the season. Without these problems, who knows if a Cinderella run would have ensued? Probably not. The roster was definitely still missing something. And so, Memphis would go on to knock the former dynasty out in 5 via the biggest upset since Golden State in 07. It was over. There's a beautiful article on Bleacher Report from May 4th, 2011, which lists each reason why their time was up in extreme detail. Tim Duncan was old. He hadn't scored 30 points in any game throughout the 11 season, going without the mark for the first time ever in his career. As a knee injury typically constitutes, his performance versus Memphis spelled doom, as Zach Randolph dominated him and any other excuse for a big man pop offered up. Their draft picks had been average as expected, leaving no real pieces able to begin carrying the torch. The big position next to Duncan never had a clear answer after Robinson hung it up. Parker and Manu were losing too many steps to be able to provide what was needed to win, and of course, the Wild West remained wild. Quite literally, the only way to salvage this would be some non-existent trade, non-existent free agent splash, or, once again, getting lucky in the draft. The San Antonio Spurs, once again, got lucky in the draft. Well, okay, this might be another incident of created luck. Enter Kawhi Leonard, who we can now determine likely ended up being the best player selected in 2011. Needing to find a long-term solution concerning their wing rotation, George Hill was dealt for Kawhi, who'd been picked by the Pacers at number 15. In the future, he could slot right into the 3 next to the rest of the core and continue helping them win. Outstanding athleticism and size made him an ideal fit, well worth the cost. And during another lockout year, a total of 66 games would be played, of which they'd win 50, once again setting a record high win percentage since 06. Meanwhile, the West had arguably fallen off a bit, with the Lakers in shambles on the heels of being swept and a failed Chris Paul trade, Zebo being slowed by a knee injury from Memphis, the defending champion Mavs opting not to bring back Tyson Chandler, and the Clippers not yet reaching their full potential in only the first year of CP3. Record-wise, it became Spurs, Thunder, then everyone else in a very weird and rushed season, seeing to excessive injuries. Ginobili once again included here. Surgery was required for a fractured metacarpal in his left hand, also straining his oblique upon returning 22 games later. The lowly 34 games that injuries limited him to would have suggested real contention could once again be off the table, except for the fact his unit trudged through without him, putting out an array of younger support pieces to hold the fort. By the time the postseason approached, Utah in round 1 provided no scare. Then they somewhat surprisingly posted a sweep against the newly minted Lob City. Something special was on the horizon. Including regular season wins dating back to April 12th, San Antonio had now strung together 18 straight victories. What's more, 13 of these dubs were by double-digit margins. I can vividly remember being in high school telling a friend they looked pretty unbeatable. The ball movement was on point, the unselfishness. I didn't consider any team worthy of the match at the time, especially considering D Rose was gone and Bosh had been injured. If 2012 wasn't right for their 5th ring, when would it ever be? As far as we were concerned, they'd already just narrowly extended their life cycle after being dormant for 4 years. 2 games into the conference finals, these sentiments were reinforced as they stamped out the Young Thunder, who were conference finals runner-ups in 2011. Having lost to the eventual champion Mavs, it looked as if their time still hadn't arrived 1 year later. Then suddenly, faster than anyone could realize what was happening, the win streak was over. 20 straight victories into the conference finals without finishing the job is unheard of. Only so was a rise to power as quick as OKC's had been. Credit for the turnaround surprisingly starts with Thabo Sefolosha, who took on the challenge of defending Parker and Ginobili, giving his team much needed switching to slow down San Antonio's insane offense. From that starting point, the torch seemed to officially be passing, with OKC completing an improbable reverse sweep over an older team who'd been desperate to add just one more jewel to the crown. How is it even possible an aging squad which had already won multiple titles simply stuck around after multiple years of crushing defeats? With Duncan and Manu quickly aging, not a single soul would have questioned the beginning of a rebuild by now, especially after Durant and company proved their worthiness so early on. It just isn't the way business was handled there. The baton was seamlessly passed from Robinson to Duncan, then Timmy took a backseat as he aged to whoever needed it from year to year, whether it be Tony or Manu. In 15 years since his drafting, San Antonio never failed to reach 50 wins, only falling short once on the technicality of 1999 being a 50-game season. The winning culture consistency was enough for those threes who never want to play anywhere else if it wasn't necessary. With 2013 approaching, however, one had to ask, what team has ever won multiple championships early on, lost for 6 straight, then produced another with that same core? A good start was Popovich completely handing the keys to Tony Parker finally, who just turned 30 and clearly presented the best option moving forward. This involved calling more plays for him, new fourth quarter looks, and granting autonomy to run the team from a leadership standpoint the way he did so overseas during the summer. In typical Spurs culture fashion, the first thing Parker did upon receiving this request was ask if Duncan was okay with it. Of course he was. 2013 marked the first time in a decade another teammate outside of the Big Three would infiltrate their scoring leaderboard. As you've surely guessed, this player was none other than Kawhi Leonard, who narrowly edged out six-man Manu Ginobili. It wasn't by much, yet a clear sign of things to come. Just maybe there'd be another torchbearer after all. On the topic of the ever-developing Western frontier, San Antonio caught multiple breaks at the right time. With the super team era in full swing, the Lakers would push all their chips in acquiring Dwight Howard and longtime rival Steve Nash, only to become one of the biggest failed experiments ever through multiple injuries and other issues. OKC, before eventually getting injured out of the postseason, decided to trade James Harden prior to opening night, immediately capping their potential regardless of what future records suggested. Essentially, as long as they could stay healthy, the Spurs would be right back in the thick of it all toward the end, with a great chance at toppling their young counterparts in a rematch. Outside of officially promoting Parker, Boris Diaw signed on to play with him as they'd been longtime friends dating back to their days overseas. He was a bit older and surely no star, however, a great versatile cog to throw on top of an offense predicated on sharing the rock. Add another nearly 60-win season to the books, but also an important bit of gamesmanship I fear no one actually recalls. On November 29th, Miami and San Antonio were slated to face off in South Beach for a potential finals preview. After all, the series was very nearly brought to reality just 5 months earlier. Instead, after defeating Orlando one night earlier, Pop sent his stars home to rest ahead of a nationally televised marquee matchup, before it was the norm. In fact, I don't remember this happening much, if at all, before that night. A move to rest his key guys who'd routinely been falling short by April and May? A revolt at the league for scheduling such a big game on the second night of a back-to-back? Or a chess move as to not show Miami anything they'd potentially be up against down the road? In any case, Spoelstra returned the favor in March by sitting both Wade and James when they visited Texas, except without receiving punishment. Pop's decision cost the organization $250,000. David Stern citing there was no fair warning of the plans, and it was done early in the season, which again hadn't been the norm. Not only did Spoelstra still at least play Bosch, and win by the way, March wasn't an unusual time to rest guys. It can also be deduced proper channels were used to notify interested parties ahead of time. So, fans were given zero preview of the upcoming finals during the regular season, which may also explain why some of us didn't quite know what to make of it by June. The defending champs looked as dominant as ever, hosting the most raw talent in the league, the best player in the league, jotting down a 27-game win streak to cap it all off. The old guys were good again, but they were always good, and they always played well in the regular season. And multiple times now, they didn't press in the playoffs only to fall flat at a specific moment. Good, but also old and boring. That's the label they'd built for themselves through the waning years. You couldn't tell a whole lot from their Western Conference run either, given how good they'd been previously. The Kobe-less Lakers were quick work. This young Warriors team no one knew anything about had actually placed themselves in great position to advance early on before falling, then a little get back on a Grizzlies core who'd embarrassed them just 2 seasons before. What changed? Defense, and Tony Parker. Unlike the previous seasons of depending on questionable support pieces and older guys, the current defense now held Zach Randolph to 30%, as neither he nor Marc Gasol surpassed 20 points in any of the 4 matches. With Mike Conley also in a box, a team mainly known for its D in the first place had no way to respond. And yeah, as mentioned earlier, Parker settled into his role as the man. Duncan saying, quote, "He's been amazing. Every year he gets better and better and better. I told him I'm just riding his coattails. He's been carrying us. You see tonight he just takes over and handles the entire game. He's awesome. He was outstanding the whole series. He controlled the whole series with his penetration." Hey look, another outstanding call from Popovich. To put a bow on it, the 12-2 Spurs throughout the Western Conference playoffs featured their biggest point differential of any of their previous title teams at plus 10.1. The light at the end of the tunnel was blinding. Well, especially through infrared. Although Parker would carry his play directly into the finals, knocking down the Game 1 dagger, this fortune would not last as long as it needed to. Despite a role player in Danny Green shooting well enough to possibly win Finals MVP, despite taking a 3-2 lead back to Miami and practically winning Game 6 where Duncan was posting another all-time Finals game, in cruel fashion, they'd fall victim to one of NBA history's greatest moments. To this day, Pop is blamed with holding Tim Duncan out of the play, resulting in a forfeited offensive rebound leading to the shot. I still hold the belief it's unfair given the goal was stopping a three-pointer, however, I understand the cries. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Parker admits he knew it was all over after Game 6. You may argue how it's a composed dynasty and their mental toughness never let it cross their minds, then you'd just be ignoring the human element. I'm not a Spurs fan, and witnessing the manner in which they lost even hurt my chest. After basically exhaling at the sight of Larry O'Brien and the yellow ropes, being able to contain their emotions and immediately turn around to win Game 7 on the road was never likely. Unbelievably, they were only a Tim Duncan hook shot away from potentially turning the tides and finishing the job anyways, but the story had been written. Simply making it back to the NBA Finals required 6 seasons and numerous setbacks. Normal circumstances would have suggested a storybook ending, and there was one, just for LeBron and the Heatles at the moment. The 2013 NBA Finals remains the most heartbreaking loss of all time in my opinion. No injuries, no suspension, just raw fumbling through the lack of simple fundamentals, and it wasn't like this specific core had too many attempts left. Age 40 was staring Tim and Manu down, having just seen their team play at statistically its highest level ever. Considering the new emotional toll, maybe it was time to accept reality. Well, reality presented that they were still the best team in the West, as even if they didn't contain the raw talent and youth of others, nobody could match the ball movement and smarts they possessed. As so many other years in the past, teams such as Oklahoma and the Clippers could play with them, nobody could say with their chest they could flat out beat them. And so, San Antonio ran it back without hesitation, as Pop showed his team tape of the 13 finals on the first day of camp to remind them what this campaign would be about. It was all the motivation Tony and company needed. The AT&T Center would bear witness to their 4th 60-win season since acquiring Tim Duncan in one of the hungriest displays for redemption ever. And despite this feat, the bare-bones Dallas Mavericks, 3 years removed from being a championship team, still somehow pushed their rivals to the brink of elimination as an 8th seed. Could you imagine history today had they suffered a second upset to a comparatively subpar team? I mean, it was also just compliments to how strong the West remained. Dallas practically being a 50-win team whose record would have landed them 3rd in the East. No matter, business as usual with a blowout in Game 7 behind Tony Parker's 32 points. Round 2 brung a much easier gentleman's sweep of the young Blazers, setting up a grudge match with the finally quote-unquote healthy Thunder. Without Harden, winning a series such as the one at hand turned into an uphill battle regardless, but not even having Serge Ibaka, the man they'd chosen to pay, guaranteed an 0-2 deficit to start out. Fittingly, in OT of Game 6 with OKC desperately trying to force a 7th, it was Kawhi Leonard who literally snatched their chances, more or less sealing the deal and helping his guys to their 2nd straight NBA Finals. A sign of things to come? Absolutely. Before the rematch, Duncan confidently proclaimed to the media they'd do it this time. It was all he and Tony talked about to each other. For them, losing 2 straight to the same team was an impossibility. At any cost, the dynasty would not suffer this disservice on their watch. What proceeded to take place is perhaps the greatest display of team basketball ever. The passing, the shooting, the defense. Despite going back to Miami tired, there hadn't been a single way that he could outplay them for 4 full games this time. It was so pure, in fact, I'm convinced even had LeBron not have cramped in game 1 and they'd gone on to win, San Antonio would have just won 4 straight. It's possibly the greatest single year comeback story ever, as at long last, the San Antonio Spurs were back on top. 7 seasons removed from their last title with the same 3 guys, now plus Kawhi. Unheard of. That was the most important factor, by the way. No Timmy MVP, no Manu or Tony, not even Danny Green. Leonard would take home the honors at age 22 with averages of 18 points and 6 rebounds, shooting nearly 60% from both the field and 3, and possibly being the only player LeBron has ever been visibly shaken to see checked into a game. Oh, youngest finals MVP ever, by the way. This was diabolical. Not only had they continued to be excellent year after year despite the failures, once again, they'd apparently struck gold in the draft. Here was an athletic two-way wing whose confidence wasn't crushed in the slightest despite his missed free throw being a huge reason for the previous failure. With no Western teams recently being able to handle them, and a new young prospect getting better every season, what was to prevent a repeat giving Timmy 6 rings? What was to prevent them from slowly passing the torch to Leonard and possibly rebuilding around him while still doing so? The fans having convinced Duncan to run it back during a beautiful title parade, a fresh 55-win season followed, with Kawhi Leonard officially taking the reins as leading scorer, more importantly proving he could handle added responsibility, while also winning Defensive Player of the Year. The matter was settled. Pop had officially found his next superstar at long last. 55 wins qualified for 5th best in the West. Once again, a mark which would have placed them 2nd in the East. Instead, due to whacked out division rules that thankfully no longer exist, they drew a first round bout against Lob City, who'd grown substantially since their original 2012 meeting. In a normal world, the 4-5 matchup would have yielded a Memphis rematch, which while still being tough was probably preferred. Still, this series was winnable, outside of the one stroke of luck the Clippers have ever had in the playoffs, leading to the champs' dramatic exit in round 1. To be fair, a 2015 repeat run had multiple roadblocks outside of LA, with a very likely Western Conference Finals battle against the now 67-15 Warriors awaiting if they traverse the rest of the conference anyways. As a reminder, Steph and company did damage against them in 2013 at their pup phase. Would have been fun to rekindle here for sure. Coming into 2016 with the confidence of a champion, San An required an upgrade to compete, especially considering Timmy could have retired already. Possessing such knowledge, they'd recruit big man David West, who could excel at a backup role on a stacked team, and then send shockwaves landing LaMarcus Aldridge. Yes, the team only a year removed from posting one of the best finals performances ever signed a top big man in the league to not only replace Tim, but play with him and the upcoming Kawhi Leonard. To make the picture clear, the front office had managed to hang on to its core 3 all this time, luck into finessing Kawhi to kick off the future, and sign his future dual partner while the core 3 still played and competed with them. One of the only teams ever to simultaneously have its past, present, and future under one roof. It even required Bruce Bowen agreeing to unretire his number 12 following the theme of unselfishness long set within the culture. A power play so strong, it immediately catapulted them to favorites in many fans' eyes, especially fans who were still giving Golden State flack for winning a ring many believed they'd caught one too many breaks for. The 2016 Spurs could have their own video. We're discussing a squad where, while talks of the 72-10 Bulls record finally being snapped were happening, it took till the end of the season to confirm San Antonio wouldn't overtake them. Finishing 6 wins behind history's greatest team record-wise, they remain 10 wins ahead of the next best unit in Cleveland, ranked 1st in defensive rating and 4th in offensive rating. Kawhi took another leap, qualifying for his first ever All-Star game, repeating as Depoy and finishing 2nd in MVP voting, while Aldridge posted the 2nd highest points per game on the roster behind him, clearly showing where it was all headed. NBA fandom awaited a clash of titans in the conference finals, swearing Golden State would finally meet their match, only to watch yet another disappointment as this dream team would bow out in 6 to OKC in a semifinals meeting. What the hell could have possibly happened, you ask? It's simple. They played what Andre Iguodala considers to be the best team in the playoffs. Long, athletic, lightning fast, electric scoring. San Antonio had a lot, no doubt, but you can't deny the speed was lacking, and Father Time finally knocked on the Duncan residence. posting averages of 6 and 4 on 36%. While Kawhi shot well below his season average from 3, the Thunder took advantage and avenged a gut-wrenching 2014 loss. In typical Timmy fashion, he called it quits on a random July day with absolutely no warning. After 19 seasons, 5 titles, 2 MVPs, 3 Finals MVPs, and an unmistakable claim to the stake of greatest power forward in history, his work here was finally done. He left the organization in good hands, a million times better than he'd found it. Kawhi and Aldridge could take it from here, very likely to add at least a title or 2 before the 2020s. That was until Kevin Durant joined Golden State. Funny enough, former teammate Kendrick Perkins revealed KD asked him before deciding, and he recommended none other than the Spurs, who he did take a meeting with. Never mind the fact Durant had once called Kawhi a system player, slotting in next to him and Aldridge would have probably guaranteed a ring nearly as much as playing with Steph did. However, the Warriors were no doubt an easier fit, so he chose to become invincible. Which makes past conversations surrounding 2017 peculiar only because an infamous injury to Kawhi is where a cohort of fans still believe NBA history changed. They were dominating Game 1, Kawhi had 26 points in 23 minutes, and the team had won 61 regular season games, so yeah, they were elite, no doubt. I just never bought the idea that a team who caused so much commotion was about to lose a whole series based on part of one game. Not to mention, as good as San Antonio was, they'd lost 2 games in both prior series to inferior teams. Either way, Tony Parker went down against the Rockets via a devastating quad injury, and now without Kawhi, the Western Conference Finals turned into a mockery of the sport. It goes even deeper from there though. To begin the 2018 campaign, Kawhi would miss preseason rehabbing from thigh tendinopathy with no return timetable set. Then it was the opener, then it was mid-November where Pop assured we'd see him soon, and finally after 27 games, he debuted on a minute restriction. Through a very sketchy 9 appearances between December and mid-January, he fell back out indefinitely to continue rehab. Reports of a rift between his camp and the organization now surfacing, with Kawhi's uncle denying such allegations. After receiving a second opinion elsewhere, Pop told the media he'd be surprised to see him return at all, even though Leonard had been cleared by their medical team. Their medical team. Keywords. Around March, further confusion swirled as Leonard did the typical superstar performance claiming he wanted to finish his career in San Antonio, complicated by questions of his upcoming free agency in a little over 1 year. Then, a mid-March return was floated, only to be shot down 2 days beforehand with more injury evaluations. Around this time, David Robinson emerged from the woodworks, downplaying any tension between Kawhi's camp and management, although anyone could see how weird it all gotten. March continued to pass, and now Manu Ginobili is telling reporters the team can't keep playing with the expectation of their superstar returning. An ESPN break comes through shortly after, alleging Tony Parker tried to convince Leonard to return in the playoffs at a team meeting, which immediately got shot down by multiple players including Danny Green. He did, however, directly tell us himself he did 8 months of rehab on an injury similar to Kawhi's, but, quote, mine was 100 times worse. He was factually correct, it's just Kawhi's was a wear and tear injury that had no clear fix, so it was a questionable comment about a recovering teammate for sure. Timing also certainly didn't help. Speaking of timing, on April 1st, Popovich presented any potential return being a matter of Leonard and, quote, his group. You'll have to ask Kawhi and his group that question. Okay, Admiral, you can say the tension is no big deal, but you can't change the tone coming from within the organization. For anyone who was in denial or couldn't read between the lines, Leonard's rehab took place thousands of miles away in New York while his team began its playoff journey with a gleaming disconnect looming dangerously close to a contract year. After a predictable first-round exit to Golden State with their star nowhere to be found, even in a suit behind the bench, the next predictable event transpired: Kawhi's trade request. Just like that, 2 decades of stability and tradition had been broken as their current torchbearer abandoned ship only 2 seasons after accepting it. In the end, his quad situation had simply eroded trust and connection between the 2 camps, causing an irreparable rift with free agency looming. Wasting no time to oblige, he was sent north along with Danny Green in return for Jakob Poeltl, a 2019 protected first, and DeMar DeRozan. Okay, well, it wasn't a terrible salvage job given the situation. There was also just no chance in hell this new duo was competing with the Warriors when it's not even guaranteed their MVP candidate could have gotten it done. As if Kawhi's premature departure wasn't a sign of the times, Manu Ginobili announced his retirement, and Tony Parker left to the Hornets. For him, it was simply a matter of ending his career on his own terms after such a devastating injury. Over the summer, Popovich notified him he'd be demoted to third-string point guard if he returned, which Parker simply wasn't willing to accept. He wanted to go out playing. Remember this information, it'll be important later. Their winning ways continued though, yet the record spoke volumes as it became the first sub-50 win season when fully healthy since 1997. Even worse, this squad only improved by one win over the 2018 team, which basically never even had Kawhi. Again, they were definitely out of championship talks for the foreseeable future, and a narrow first-round exit to the Nuggets did nothing to spark confidence. If it hadn't been clear in this first sample, 2020 officially brought a long-winning franchise face-to-face with reality. Their luck had run dry. They'd need to rebuild sooner or later like anybody else. With what though? DeRozan was already 30 and clearly not the number one on a title team. LaMarcus Aldridge had broached his mid-30s, 4 years of the plan for him to be a super second option having gone to waste already, and there wasn't a Kawhi-like torchbearer on the roster to help them contend while developing. In a leftover bit of luck from their draft savviness though, DeJounte Murray was already on the roster from the 2016 draft when he was selected 29th. Yet another diamond in the rough. Kind of. With the 29th pick in the 2019 draft, they found Keldon Johnson, who would later show flashes worthy of giving him a real try. After a below 500 season before the bubble ever kicked off, this routine winner had finally been brought to its knees, suffering their first playoff miss since David Robinson's foot snapped. With that, however, they could get a decent pick in the draft, which turned out to be Devin Vassell at 11. Aldridge appeared to be over the hill, pushing the two parties towards a buyout. Then near the conclusion of the 21 campaign, DeMar DeRozan was sent to Chicago, bringing back a couple of role players, a protected first and 2 second rounders. Right on cue, DeJounte Murray broke out into an all-star during 2022. You might already notice the issue here though. Being drafted 6 seasons ago, he was 25 years old on a roster nowhere near ready to compete, with one of his earlier seasons of development going down the drain due to a torn ACL. Also, he'd already been signed to an extension back in October of 2019, with the next few seasons not necessarily having gone anywhere. For real NBA watchers, this was enough to know his future lay elsewhere, but the way he spoke of the Spurs post-departure, pretty unheard of. After being traded to Atlanta in the summer, he'd later revealed he believed the organization played mind games with him concerning his playing time, was mad about Tony Parker leaving to waste a year in Charlotte rather than mentoring him as PG, basically called them lucky for drafting Tim Duncan, alleged the entire core 3 including Pop ignored him when he was drafted, and took an unrelated shot saying the Spurs were boring to him as a kid, revealing he'd wanted to be traded early in his career. He isn't the only former Spur to take shots at the franchise since moving on in life, as Tony Parker and many of the stars have admitted it ain't for everyone. Still, you couldn't ignore how the recent trend was diverging. Outside of those 3, they'd alienated 2 recent star players in some way. Commencing another deal in a relatively short time period, San Antonio sent Murray to ATL for Danilo Gallinari, 3 first-round picks, and a pick swap. Wisely so, by the way. Notice how the front office knew they weren't shit and were never gonna be shit with him? They simply acted accordingly, unlike some franchises, as if there were ever a time to be bad in the league. 2023 was it, with yet another generational prospect set to hit the hardwood a year out. After drafting David Robinson, Tim Duncan, finding Manu Ginobili, very narrowly lucking into Tony Parker through a draft day mishap, and pulling off a deal for Kawhi Leonard who had no business going straight to a solidified team, what were the chances this same franchise could possibly be enabled to select a flat-out unicorn? An alien, a player so ridiculously gifted with physicals he could one day break basketball? 14%. Those were the chances, along with Houston and Detroit. It's just Houston and Detroit combined might match the luck of the San Antonio Spurs. And so, with the first overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft, Victor Wembanyama. Every bit as good as advertised, even with the first portion of the season being almost complete randomness in the offense with no guarantee his teammates would pass to him. The tape has come out as wicked as you thought it would, and even on minutes restrictions, the numbers are ridiculous. Devin Vassell recently got his big contract extension, and I've got a feeling plenty of fans just learned who he was as a result of tuning into one of many national TV games they've now been afforded. The team as a whole sucks. The franchise has spent years overcoming hurdles that had been virtually unknown to them, However, they've also got Pop locked up for the foreseeable future, who you can now see should be credited with multiple critical decisions throughout the course of their winning history. In basketball, nothing is guaranteed. Even knowing so, one has to look at Vic and believe there's just very few ways anybody could mess this up, much less the man who steered the ship of 5 NBA titles across 3 decades. Was he lucky? Of course. He's never denied as much. He's also renowned, and when guys buy in, the results speak for themselves. Wemby, at least by what he says, has bought into the style. Pop remains cordial even with those who maybe hadn't, as when Leonard most recently returned to San Antonio, he took it upon himself to grab the mic and attempt to quiet a booing crowd he felt was disrespecting a franchise legend. They've got plenty of years ahead, another all-time talent, and all the knowledge to make it work. Who knows if luck will roll out with the basketball this time, but if you made it this far, you now understand what's made San Antonio not only one of the luckiest, but greatest and savviest franchises of all time.